Imagine living in a world where your entire future, your very security, and your place in society hinged on one single, unpredictable thing. What if your value as a human being was measured not by your intelligence, your kindness, or your skills, but by your ability to bring new life into the world? This was the stark reality for women in 1222. Number 12, the royal pressure cooker. For a woman born into a royal house in 1222, her very existence was a strategic chess piece on the grand board of European power. From the moment she drew her first breath, her potential fertility was a subject of intense scrutiny and immense value. Her destiny was not her own. It was inextricably linked to the survival and expansion of a dynasty. Princess, even as a tiny infant, was seen as a future queen consort, and her primary, indeed almost her sole, function in that role was to produce heirs, specifically male heirs. The stability of kingdoms, the continuation of royal lines, and the prevention of devastating succession crises all rested squarely on the shoulders of these young women. Consider the young Princess Isabella, daughter of King John of England, who in 1222 was still a child but already a pawn in international diplomacy. Future marriage, perhaps to Emperor Frederick II of the Holy Roman Empire, would be a union of immense political significance, and its success would be judged almost entirely on whether she could bear children, particularly sons, to secure the future of such a powerful alliance. The pressure on these royal women was unimaginable. Every ache, every skipped moon cycle, every faint illness would be observed by an entire court of anxious advisors, physicians, and ambitious relatives. The hopes of a nation, or at least a ruling class, rested on her reproductive organs. If she failed to conceive, or if she bore only daughters, the whispers would begin. Was she barren? Was there a curse? Was the marriage ill-fated? These questions could lead to annulments, the breaking of alliances, and even, in extreme cases, accusations of witchcraft or divine displeasure. The queen's personal worth was not just about her virtue or her piety, though those were important. Her ultimate measure was her womb. Imagine the mental strain of knowing that a successful birth, especially of a son, would solidify your position, bring immense relief to your husband and his kingdom, and secure your own influence, while failure could lead to your sidelining, replacement, or worse. The royal nursery was not just a collection of cribs, it was the most critical chamber in the entire castle, a constant reminder of the queen's paramount duty. Chronicles from the time, like the Chronica Majora by Matthew Paris, frequently mention the births of royal children, particularly sons, as events of national importance, detailing the celebrations and the hopes invested in these newborns. Conversely, periods of barrenness or the repeated birth of daughters are often noted with an undertone of anxiety or disappointment, reflecting the immense pressure that bore down on these women in the highest echelons of society. Their lives were lived under the unforgiving spotlight of dynastic expectation, where fertility was the crown jewel of their existence. Number 11, securing the family name. Beyond the gilded halls of royalty, the necessity of procreation echoed through every level of society, particularly for noble and landholding families. For these houses, the continuation of the family name was not merely a matter of pride. It was a matter of survival, of inherited wealth, and of maintaining power and status. A woman's primary role in this intricate dance of lineage was to produce heirs who would carry on the surname, inherit the lands, and uphold the family's standing in the community. Without sons, a noble line could dwindle and die out, leading to the fragmentation of estates, the loss of influence, and the eventual eclipse of a once proud name. Daughters were valuable for forging alliances through marriage, but they did not typically carry on the family name or inherit the primary estates in the same way sons did. The eldest son, the heir, was the cornerstone of the family's future, and it was a woman's sacred duty to provide one. Consider the Lady Agnes, whose family owned sprawling lands in what is now modern-day Picardy. Her marriage, arranged when she was barely into her teens, was not a union of love, but a strategic merging of properties and influence. Her husband's family, the de Montforts, had been prominent for generations, and the pressure on Agnes to bear sons was immense. Every year without a pregnancy was met with increasing anxiety, not just from her husband, but from her in-laws, her own family, and even the estate's tenants who depended on a clear line of succession for stability. She would undoubtedly be offered various remedies, folk cures, or even religious pilgrimages to saints renowned for assisting conception. The birth of her first son, a robust infant named Philippe, would have been met with enormous celebration, solidifying her position within the de Montfort household and securing her future. Her worth in their eyes skyrocketed. She had done her duty. She had secured the family name. Conversely, if Agnes had been unable to bear children, or if she had only daughters, her situation would have been precarious. Her husband might have sought an annulment, claiming the marriage was unconsummated or that she was barren, thus allowing him to marry another woman who could provide the much-needed male heir. Such an outcome would have been a personal tragedy for Agnes, likely sending her back to her birth family in disgrace, or perhaps to a convent, her purpose in life unfulfilled by the standards of the time. Family name, the legacy passed down through generations, was seen as a sacred trust, and the woman was the vessel through which this trust was upheld. The very architecture of medieval society, with its emphasis on primogeniture and the inheritance of land, made a woman's fertility not just desirable, but absolutely essential for the continued existence and prosperity of any significant lineage. Medieval charters and family trees from the period offer silent testimony to this reality, often meticulously tracing male lines through generations, with the female line acknowledged primarily for their role in producing those male heirs. Number 10. The dowry and the future. The dowry, a significant transfer of wealth or property from a bride's family to the groom or his family upon marriage, was a cornerstone of medieval marital arrangements. It served multiple purposes. It was a contribution to the new household, a security for the wife in case of widowhood, and often a way for the groom's family to gain resources or consolidate land. However, the size and value of a woman's dowry were intrinsically linked to her perceived future fertility. A woman who was believed to be healthy, young, and likely to bear many children, especially sons, could command a much larger dowry than one who was older, sickly, or suspected of being barren. In essence, her potential to reproduce added a premium to her financial worth in the marriage market. Consider the hypothetical tale of Alara of Kent. Her family, respectable but not immensely wealthy, had 2 daughters. Alara the younger was known for her robust health and vibrant youth, often assisting with the heavy work on the family's small estate. Older sister Matilda had suffered from a childhood illness that left her frail and often unwell. When marriage proposals arrived, the difference in dowry expectations was stark. Alara's potential suitors, seeing her vitality, were willing to accept a more modest dowry because they anticipated she would bring forth many strong children to work their fields or inherit their small holdings. Perceived fertility was a significant asset, a promise of future labor and continuation of their own family line. For Matilda, however, the prospects were dim. Illness, though not openly stated as a bar to marriage, cast a shadow of doubt over her ability to bear healthy children. To secure a husband for Matilda, her family would likely have to offer a disproportionately large dowry, effectively compensating the groom for the perceived risk of a barren or childless marriage. This stark difference highlights how a woman's physical condition, interpreted as a proxy for her fertility, directly impacted her family's financial outlay and her own future prospects. Moreover, the dowry often functioned as a sort of investment. The marriage produced no heirs, especially no male heirs. Certain clauses might come into play, potentially impacting the wife's access to the dowry or her security after her husband's death. The inability to produce children could even be used as a justification for the husband's family to retain a larger portion of the dowry, arguing that the marriage had not fulfilled its primary purpose. Dowry was not just money or land, it was a contract with an unspoken clause for the production of heirs. A woman's personal wealth, her access to resources in her new life, and her standing within her husband's family were all, in large part, dependent on her ability to fulfill this biological expectation. The medieval economy, deeply rooted in inherited land and generational labor, placed an immense value on the ability to produce future hands for the farm and heirs for the estate, making a woman's fertility a key economic indicator in her marriage negotiations. Number 9. When barrenness meant shame. In the social tapestry of 13th century Europe, barrenness was not merely a biological condition, it was a profound social stigma, a source of deep personal shame for the woman affected, and often a cause for familial despair. For a society that viewed procreation as a woman's primary purpose and measure of worth, the inability to bear children was akin to a failure of her very essence. It was seen as a personal flaw, sometimes even as a divine punishment for unconfessed sins or moral failing. This perception could lead to a woman being ostracized, whispered about, and relegated to a lesser status within her household and community. Imagine Alina, a gentlewoman married into a minor noble family. For years after her wedding, the cradle in her bedchamber remained empty. The initial hopes and expectations slowly morphed into concern, then thinly veiled pity, and finally, a cold distance. Her mother-in-law might offer unsolicited advice, herbal remedies, or even accusations, implying Alina was somehow at fault. Neighbors might murmur about her cursed womb, or speculate about her husband's right to seek an annulment. Alina herself would likely internalize this societal judgment. Her daily prayers would become desperate pleas for a child, her heart heavy with guilt and inadequacy. She might feel a sense of profound incompleteness, that she had failed in the most fundamental duty of womanhood. This inner turmoil would be compounded by the external pressures. She might be excluded from gatherings of women discussing their children, or subtly marginalized in discussions about the future of the family estate. The shame associated with barrenness was not just personal, it reflected poorly on her husband and his family. Childless marriage meant a dead end for their lineage, a potential loss of land or influence. The husband might be urged to seek a different wife, or in more extreme cases, might even be suspected of impotence himself, though the blame more commonly fell upon the wife. Accounts from medieval chronicles and legal records, while not always sympathetic, hint at the plight of barren women. They show annulment cases where the inability to conceive is a central point of contention, and they reflect a societal bias that placed the burden of procreation almost entirely on the woman. Barren woman, despite any other virtues she possessed, was often viewed as incomplete, as having failed her husband, her family, and even God. Her life, for many, was an unfulfilled prophecy, leaving her with a lingering sense of unworthiness that permeated every aspect of her existence. This deeply ingrained belief made barrenness not just a medical issue, but a social and psychological torment. Number 8, the role of the midwife and the healer. In 1222, the midwife was not just a skilled attendant at childbirth. She was often a central figure in a woman's reproductive life, extending her influence far beyond the birthing chamber. Midwives, along with local healers, and sometimes even monks or nuns with knowledge of herbs, were the primary sources of advice and intervention when a woman struggled to conceive. Their role underscored the community's profound investment in a woman's fertility, as they were called upon to fix what was perceived as a critical failure in the natural order. These practitioners, often older women with generations of accumulated knowledge, held a unique and respected position, intimately involved in the most private and vital aspects of a woman's life. When a woman, say Lady Beatrice, had been married for several years without conceiving, it was to the village midwife, Ilara, that she would first turn. Ilara would meticulously inquire about Beatrice's monthly cycles, her general health, her diet, and even her emotional state. She might prescribe specific herbal concoctions, infusions of mugwort, pennyroyal, or vervain, believed to aid fertility or regulate cycles. She might suggest dietary changes, special baths, or even physical manipulation. Her advice was often a blend of practical observation, traditional remedies, and deeply held folk beliefs. Problem persisted, Ilara might consult with other healers, or recommend a pilgrimage to a holy site known for miraculous conceptions, or even suggest specific prayers or offerings to saints. Focus was always on opening the womb, strengthening the body, and aligning it with divine will to achieve pregnancy. Beyond these practical interventions, the midwife also played a crucial psychological role. She offered hope, solace, and understanding in a situation that often brought immense distress and shame. She was a confidant, a non-judgmental ear for a woman grappling with her perceived failure. However, her presence also reinforced the societal expectation that a woman must conceive. Her very expertise was built around facilitating fertility, not questioning its importance. Despite all efforts, a woman remained barren. The midwife's power was limited. She might conclude that it was simply God's will, offering a spiritual rather than a medical explanation for the failure, thus shifting the burden from the individual to a divine decree. The medical texts of the time, such as those emanating from the famed medical school of Salerno, though limited in their understanding of human anatomy and physiology, also focused heavily on fertility. They discussed hot and cold humors, ideal conditions for conception, and various remedies to encourage pregnancy or prevent miscarriage. While these texts were mostly for literate physicians, their general principles filtered down to local healers and midwives. The extensive body of knowledge, however rudimentary, dedicated to fertility issues demonstrates just how central this aspect was to a woman's perceived health and function. Constant presence and expertise of the midwife and healer were a daily reminder to every woman of her central biological purpose. Number 7. Marriage alliances and political power. For aristocratic families in 1222, marriage was rarely about romantic love. It was a potent tool for forging political alliances, consolidating land, and extending influence. At the heart of these strategic unions lay the woman's fertility, for it was through her ability to bear heirs that the alliance would be cemented and its long-term benefits secured. A marriage without the promise of children was a fragile agreement, easily dissolved or rendered ineffective, leaving the families involved with little more than a piece of parchment and a lingering sense of opportunity lost. The success of such a union was measured not just in land or titles, but in the number and gender of the children it produced, particularly sons, who would embody the new combined power of the two families. Consider the example of Lady Philippa, a daughter of a powerful count in northern France. Her marriage to a neighboring duke was meticulously negotiated for months, involving intricate details about dowry, feudal obligations, and military support. Central to all these discussions was Philippa herself, specifically her age, her health, and any signs that might indicate her fertility. Was she robust? Had she matured sufficiently to bear children? Was there any history of barrenness in her mother's line? These were not polite inquiries, they were crucial intelligence, because the entire alliance hinged on Philippa's capacity to produce a male heir who would unite the two houses and inherit both sets of lands. If she failed, the alliance could unravel, leading to renewed conflict or a strategic vacuum. Once married, the pressure on Philippa would be immense. The birth of a son would be heralded as a triumph, solidifying the alliance and ensuring its continuation. Her standing within her new ducal court would rise dramatically. She would have fulfilled her paramount duty, ensuring the future of both her husband's and, indirectly, her own family's interests. This son would be the living embodiment of the political pact, a tangible guarantee of its longevity. Conversely, if Philippa remained barren, or if she only bore daughters, the alliance would be viewed as weak. Whispers of annulment, a common tactic for dissolving childless marriages, would begin to circulate, potentially plunging the region back into political instability. Duke might seek another wife, perhaps from a different noble house, in an attempt to secure his succession, thereby invalidating the original alliance and potentially alienating Philippa's powerful father. Historical records, such as treaty documents and marriage contracts from the period, often implicitly or explicitly underline this expectation. While not always directly stating, she must bear sons, the very structure of inheritance laws and the emphasis on legitimate heirs made it abundantly clear. A woman's womb was thus a political instrument, capable of cementing peace, consolidating power, and shaping the future of entire regions. Personal worth in this context was entirely subsumed by her potential to be the biological conduit for dynastic power. She was not just a bride, she was a living, breathing component of a meticulously planned geopolitical strategy, with her fertility as its linchpin. Number 6. The widowed woman's plight. For a woman in 1222, the death of her husband, particularly if she had no children or no surviving sons, could be a catastrophic event, plunging her into immediate and profound insecurity. Her worth, her future prospects, and her very ability to survive independently were intimately tied to whether she had produced heirs. Without children, especially male children, a widow was often left vulnerable, stripped of her position, and facing an uncertain, often bleak future. Her worth to society and to her deceased husband's family diminished significantly if she had not fulfilled her reproductive purpose. Consider the difficult situation of Lady Isolde. She was married to a minor knight, Sir Gregory, for 5 years, but their union remained childless. When Sir Gregory unexpectedly died from a riding accident, Isolde found herself in a perilous position. Without an heir, there was no direct successor to inherit Sir Gregory's small estate and lands. His family, perhaps distant cousins, would likely claim the inheritance, seeing no reason to support Isolde. While her dowry might offer some meager financial security, it was often inadequate to maintain her former lifestyle or provide for her long-term needs. She might be forced to return to her own family, becoming a burden, or if they could not support her, she might be compelled to enter a convent, even if she had no religious calling, simply as a means of survival and shelter. Her status as lady would fade, replaced by the unfortunate label of a childless widow. In stark contrast, imagine Isolde's contemporary Lady Mathilde, who also lost her husband, Sir Robert. However, Mathilde had borne 2 healthy sons and a daughter. Upon Sir Robert's death, her position was secure. As the mother of the heirs, she would often be granted dower rights, a portion of her husband's lands or income to support herself and the children. She might even be appointed as regent, governing the estate on behalf of her young sons until they came of age. Her sons were her living testament to her value, her guarantee of continued status and support. Her worth was affirmed through their existence. The legal and social structures of the time reinforced this divide. Dower, a widow's right to a portion of her deceased husband's property, was generally granted for her lifetime only and was often contingent on her not remarrying, or was significantly reduced if there were no heirs to support. Without children, especially sons who could inherit, a widow's claim on her husband's estate was weaker, as her purpose within that family had not been fulfilled. She was seen as having failed to perpetuate the lineage, and therefore had less claim to its resources. The records of medieval courts and manor rolls frequently contain petitions from childless widows, revealing their desperation and the precariousness of their existence, starkly highlighting how children, particularly sons, were a woman's most significant asset for her own security and well-being in widowhood. Her womb, in essence, was her retirement plan. Number 5. Religious blessings and curses. In 1222, medieval society was deeply religious, and the will of God was seen as the ultimate arbiter of all earthly events, including a woman's fertility. The ability to bear children was widely interpreted as a divine blessing, a sign of God's favor, and a testament to a woman's piety and virtue. Conversely, barrenness was often perceived as a curse, a sign of God's displeasure, or even as a punishment for sin. This religious interpretation added an immense layer of spiritual pressure and personal guilt to the biological reality of procreation, tying a woman's spiritual standing directly to her reproductive capacity. Consider the widespread veneration of saints associated with fertility, such as Saint Anne, the mother of the Virgin Mary, or Saint Giles. Women who struggled to conceive would embark on arduous pilgrimages to shrines dedicated to these saints, offering fervent prayers, lighting candles, and leaving votive offerings, desperately seeking divine intervention. A successful pregnancy after years of barrenness would be hailed as a miracle, a direct answer to prayer, and would elevate the woman's spiritual standing within her community. She would be seen as blessed, perhaps even chosen, reinforcing the idea that fertility was a gift from God. Perceived worth in the eyes of her peers, and perhaps more importantly, in her own eyes, would skyrocket. She had finally received God's blessing. On the other hand, the absence of children could lead to agonizing self-reflection and communal suspicion. A childless woman might agonize over what sin she or her ancestors might have committed to incur God's wrath. Confessors might suggest that her barrenness was a sign of unrepented sin, urging her to deeper penitence or more rigorous prayer. Whispers in the village might suggest she was secretly engaged in sorcery, or that she had displeased God in some unspoken way. Even her husband might begin to question her piety or virtue. The shame was not just social, it was spiritual. The Bible itself, a central text in medieval life, contained numerous narratives that reinforced these beliefs, from Sarah's barrenness to Hannah's pleas for a child, depicting fertility as a sign of divine blessing and barrenness, as a challenge or a trial to be overcome through faith. This religious framework also influenced how treatments for barrenness were viewed. While herbal remedies and physical interventions were employed, they were often accompanied by prayers, blessings, and relics, underscoring the belief that ultimate success rested with God. A woman's worth, therefore, was not solely determined by her physical ability to bear children, but by her perceived standing in the eyes of the divine. To be fertile was to be blessed. To be barren was to be under a cloud of spiritual suspicion, making her reproductive capacity a critical barometer of her spiritual, as well as her earthly value. Number 4. The threat of annulment. For a woman in 1222, the specter of annulment loomed large, a devastating possibility that could completely dismantle her life and status, and one of the primary grounds for such a drastic measure was the inability to produce children, particularly male heirs. Unlike a modern divorce, an annulment declared that a marriage had never been valid in the first place, often based on specific canonical impediments. While issues like consanguinity, being too closely related, or pre-existing vows were common grounds, the non-consummation of a marriage, often interpreted as the failure to produce offspring, became a key pathway for dissolution when fertility was absent. This made a woman's reproductive capacity not just desirable, but often a contractual requirement for the very legality and continuation of her marriage. Imagine the young lady Elinor, married at 16 to a baron eager for an heir to his substantial lands. Years passed, and despite all prayers and remedies, no child was born. Baron, under immense pressure from his family and his vassals, began to consider his options. He might allege that the marriage was never truly consummated, even if it physically had been, implying that because no child had resulted, it somehow lacked the spiritual or physical completeness required for a valid union. Or he might claim some hidden impediment, perhaps a distant family relationship, to justify seeking an annulment from the ecclesiastical courts. Underlying unspoken reason, however, would be Elinor's perceived barrenness. The Church, while generally upholding the sanctity of marriage, recognized the importance of procreation as one of its primary purposes. Childless marriage, especially one in which a noble line was at risk, was often seen as less effective or less valid in its fulfillment of God's purpose for matrimony. If an annulment was granted, Elinor's life would be irrevocably shattered. She would lose her status as a baroness, her home, and her security. Her dowry might be returned, perhaps partially, but her reputation would be tarnished. She would be returned to her family, often in disgrace, her chances of a second marriage significantly diminished, as she was now a woman known for her inability to bear children. She would be seen as returned goods, a defective commodity in the marriage market. For a woman, an annulment was a public declaration of her failure to fulfill her most crucial societal role. The psychological impact would be immense, a permanent stain on her honor and a source of profound personal sorrow. The threat of annulment was a constant pressure, a sword hanging over the head of any woman who did not quickly conceive. It reinforced the notion that her fundamental worth and the stability of her entire life depended on her fertility. Medieval court records and canonical law treatises are replete with examples of annulment cases, often hinting at the underlying concern about the failure to produce legitimate heirs. These legal mechanisms underscored the societal conviction that a woman's ultimate purpose in marriage was procreative, and her inability to fulfill this rendered the union, in the eyes of many, null and void. Number 3, personal worth and social acceptance. Beyond the grand political stages and legal complexities, a woman's fertility profoundly shaped her personal sense of worth and her acceptance within her immediate social circles in 1222. In a society where a woman's identity was so strongly linked to her roles as wife and mother, the ability to bear children was not just a duty, it was a fundamental component of her self-perception and her standing amongst her peers. To be a mother was to be complete, respected, and deeply embedded in the social structure. To be barren, however, could lead to a profound sense of inadequacy, isolation, and a feeling of being an outsider. Imagine Helga, a peasant woman in a small village. From her earliest years, she would have observed the lives of the older women around her. The mothers were the heart of the community, constantly surrounded by children, sharing advice on rearing, childbirth, and household management. Their days were filled with the tangible work of nurturing new life. Helga would anticipate this as her own future, the natural progression of her womanhood. When she married and began to bear children, perhaps a robust son and then several daughters, her position in the village would solidify. She would join the ranks of mothers, a part of the informal network of support and gossip, her contributions to the village workforce and future generations evident in her growing family. She would be respected, her personal worth affirmed by the visible proof of her fertility. She had fulfilled her destiny, her purpose, and her place in the social order was secure. Conversely, consider a woman like Isolde, also a peasant, who, after years of marriage, remained childless. While less likely to face formal annulment than a noblewoman, her daily life would be tinged with subtle, pervasive forms of exclusion and pity. Other women might avoid sharing their anxieties about pregnancy or childbirth with her, sensing her pain. She might be excluded from the intimate circles where mothers discuss their children's milestones and challenges. Conversations about her empty arms would circulate, often with a mix of pity and judgment. She might feel a deep personal shame, a sense of incompleteness, perhaps even believing herself to be deficient or cursed. Her husband, while perhaps loving, might also feel the societal pressure to find a way to have heirs, perhaps by taking a concubine, which would be a further humiliation for Isolde. Her acceptance within the broader community hinged significantly on her reproductive success. Women who produced many healthy children were often seen as strong, blessed, and highly valuable members of society, contributing directly to the perpetuation of families, villages, and the labor force. Those who did not, through no fault of their own, were often viewed with a degree of sorrow or even suspicion, their worth diminished in the eyes of their peers and often in their own hearts. This pervasive social understanding meant that a woman's fertility was not just a biological fact, but a crucial determinant of her psychological well-being and her integration into the very fabric of medieval life. Her womb was, in many ways, the gateway to her identity and her place in the world. Number 2, the importance of a male heir. While bearing children was paramount, the ultimate prize, the gold standard of female fertility in 1222, was the production of a male heir. A son was not just a child, he was the future. He was the one who would inherit the lands, carry on the family name, uphold its honor, lead its armies, and ensure its continued prosperity and power. For a woman, bearing a son, especially an eldest son, instantly elevated her status, solidified her position within her husband's family, and profoundly enhanced her personal worth in the eyes of the entire society. A series of daughters, while welcome in their own right for potential alliances, was never quite enough to secure a woman's future or fulfill the ultimate expectation of her marriage. Imagine the Countess Marguerite, wife of a powerful duke. First 3 pregnancies resulted in healthy daughters, beloved by their parents, but a source of growing anxiety for the ducal family and the wider court. Birth was met with a sigh of relief for a healthy child, but an underlying current of disappointment that the much-needed male heir had not arrived. The whispers would grow louder. Would the duke eventually seek an annulment? Would he be forced to name a distant male relative as his successor? Marguerite would live under immense pressure, knowing that her position was precarious, her fundamental purpose in this powerful marriage yet unfulfilled. Then came her 4th pregnancy. The anticipation would be palpable throughout the ducal household. Birth of a son, strong and healthy, would be met with an explosion of joy and celebration. Bells would ring, feasts would be held, and messengers would be dispatched to announce the news throughout the duchy and beyond. Marguerite, previously under a cloud of unspoken expectation, would suddenly become the celebrated mother of the heir. Her worth would become indisputable. She had secured the lineage, ensured the future of the ducal house, and brought immense honor to herself and her family. Her influence would grow, her voice would be heard, and her security would be guaranteed. This son was her living shield against annulment, a testament to her fulfillment of her primary duty. Conversely, a woman who only bore daughters faced a profoundly different reality. While her daughters might be valuable assets for arranged marriages that forged new alliances, they could not inherit the primary feudal lands or titles in most regions due to primogeniture. This meant that the family name, estate, and power would eventually pass out of the immediate line, often to a distant male relative, weakening the family's direct control. The mother of only daughters, while perhaps loved and respected, would never achieve the same unassailable position as the mother of a male heir. Her worth, though acknowledged for her other contributions, would remain somewhat incomplete in the eyes of a society so fixated on patrilineal succession. The emphasis on male heirs permeated everything, from inheritance laws to daily prayers for a strong son, making a woman's ability to produce one the ultimate measure of her reproductive success and her value. Number 1, the ultimate purpose of a woman's life. In the medieval mindset of 1222, a woman's ultimate purpose in life, the very core of her existence and the foundation of her identity, was seen as rooted in her ability to bear and raise children. Every aspect of her upbringing, her education, her marriage prospects, and her social standing revolved around this singular, paramount biological function. While women performed countless vital tasks in the household, on the land, and within the community, These were often viewed as secondary to or supportive of her primary role as a procreator and nurturer of the next generation. To be a woman was, in essence, to be a potential mother. From a very young age, girls were implicitly and explicitly taught about their future roles. They observed their mothers and other women in the community, learning skills for household management, cooking, textile work, and animal husbandry. Yet, all these skills were understood within the context of managing a household that would inevitably include children. Play involving dolls was not just recreation, it was preparation for motherhood. Stories, songs, and religious teachings often emphasized the sanctity of marriage and the blessing of children. A young girl understood that her journey from maiden to wife, and then to respected matron, was paved by her ability to bring forth new life. Her education, though informal, was an apprenticeship in becoming a mother. When a woman married, the expectation to conceive and bear children was immediate and universal. Her marriage was not just a personal union, it was a societal contract aimed at the continuation of families and the propagation of the human race. For the peasant woman, children meant more hands to work the land, ensuring the family's survival and future prosperity. For the noblewoman, children, especially sons, meant the continuation of a lineage, the inheritance of lands and titles, and the consolidation of power. In both spheres, children were seen as a blessing from God, a fulfillment of the divine mandate to be fruitful and multiply. Therefore, for any woman in 1222, her ability to conceive, carry, and birth healthy offspring was not just a measure of her worth, but arguably the defining measure. It shaped her sense of self, her social standing, her economic security, and even her spiritual fulfillment. A woman who bore many children, particularly sons, was seen as having achieved the pinnacle of womanhood. She was respected, valued, and her legacy was assured through her descendants. A woman who remained childless, for whatever reason, faced profound challenges to her identity, her acceptance, and her security. She was, by the standards of the time, unfulfilled in her most fundamental purpose. This pervasive societal belief, woven into the very fabric of law, religion, and daily life, meant that a woman's entire existence was, in a very real sense, defined by the potential and the outcome of her womb.